I have presided over hundreds of cases in my career, but there are some mornings in court that stay with you forever. This was one of them. The courtroom was already full before I took the bench. Not unusual for a high-profile case, but the air felt different, heavier, like something was waiting to happen. Security was tight. Journalists lined the back rows. Even the jury seemed unusually still, as if they had already sensed they were part of something bigger than a routine hearing. And then she entered Olivia Carter, daughter of a United States senator. She didn't walk in like someone facing trial. She walked in like she was attending a private meeting she expected to control. I've seen confidence before. I've seen fear, too. But what I saw in her expression was something else entirely. Certainty that consequences applied to other people, not her. She didn't acknowledge the jury, didn't glance at the bailiff. Her eyes moved across the courtroom until they landed on me. And she smiled. I leaned forward slightly. "Please be seated," I said calmly. That's when she laughed, not loudly, just enough to be heard, a small sound, but it changed the room instantly. I felt it. The tension snapped into focus. Whispers started in the gallery. The prosecutor straightened. The defense attorney lowered his gaze, and then she spoke. "You're not serious, right?" The courtroom went silent. In my experience, disrespect in court usually comes from emotion, anger, fear, panic. But this was different. This was calm, controlled, almost curious, like she was testing whether the rules even existed for her. I didn't respond immediately. Silence is a tool in a courtroom. It forces people to reveal themselves. She didn't break it, not even once. That's when I noticed something troubling. Her attorney wasn't watching me. He was watching her, like he already knew this was going to go badly. Before I could proceed, the bailiff leaned in and quietly spoke. "Your Honor, Judge Judy is observing today's session." That name shifted the energy in the room instantly, and the slightest movement of the audience changed. People straightened in their seats. A presence like that carries weight, even in silence. But Olivia Carter didn't react at all. She simply leaned back in her chair as if none of it mattered. That was the moment I understood something important. This wasn't ignorance. It was belief, a belief that nothing in this courtroom could touch her. I looked down at the case file in front of me, and for the first time that morning, I felt a strange sense of unease. Because cases like this don't start with chaos, they start with arrogance, and arrogance always waits for its moment to be corrected, but I didn't know yet what form that correction would take or how far this trial was about to go beyond control. I remember opening the case file and pausing longer than I usually would because on paper it looked almost simple, a disturbance complaint. A formal charge of contempt-related misconduct during a prior proceeding, minor in legal classification but high risk due to the individuals involved, but cases like this are never about the paper. They are about the people behind it. Olivia Carter sat there calmly, as if she had already decided the outcome of the trial before it even began. Hands folded, back relaxed. A faint expression of boredom on her face. Her father, Senator Richard Carter, was not present in the courtroom that day, but his presence was everywhere. You learn this over years on the bench. Some defendants don't carry their own weight into court. They carry their family's shadow, and that shadow can be louder than any testimony. Across from her sat the prosecutor, Michael Reeves, experienced, careful, the kind of man who chooses words like they are evidence themselves, but even he hesitated before speaking. That hesitation told me everything. The defense attorney, Daniel Carter, no relation, kept glancing at Olivia like he was trying to predict her next move rather than defend her. That is never a good sign because a lawyer should be reading the law, not the client's temperament. I called the court to order again. And that's when Olivia shifted slightly in her seat, finally speaking without being prompted. "You know," she said, tilting her head toward me, "this whole thing is kind of dramatic for what happened." A few people in the gallery reacted with quiet gasps. I noted it immediately. No remorse, no uncertainty, just dismissal. I leaned forward. "Miss Carter, you are in a courtroom. You will speak when addressed." A pause, then that same small smile returned. "Or what?" she replied softly. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed hard. I saw the prosecutor's jaw tighten. I saw the jury exchange quick glances. Even the bailiff adjusted his stance, but Olivia remained unchanged. That's when I began to understand the core of the problem. This wasn't just disrespect. It was conditioning somewhere in her life that she had learned that authority only existed when she agreed to it, and people like that are the hardest to reach with law alone because law requires acceptance, and she was rejecting it completely. I turned my attention briefly to her attorney. "Do you wish to control your client's conduct?" I asked. He swallowed before answering. "I am trying, Your Honor," but he didn't sound convinced. That silence told me more than any argument ever could. And then something unusual happened. From the back of the courtroom, noticed movement. Judge Judy, visiting the session, had not spoken a word, but her expression had changed slightly, observing, measuring, reading Olivia like a puzzle she had seen before, but not quite in this form. Olivia noticed it too. Their eyes met briefly, and for the first time that day, her smile flickered, just for a second, but I caught it, and so did the room. That single moment changed everything, because arrogance is stable until it realizes it is being studied by someone who doesn't flinch. And I knew then this case was no longer about discipline. It was becoming something much more psychological, something far more dangerous than simple courtroom defiance, and what happened next would push it past the point of control. By the time we moved deeper into the proceedings, I could feel the courtroom settling into a strange rhythm, like everyone was waiting for something to break. Olivia Carter still sat in her chair with that same composed posture. But now, I noticed small things. The way her fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped. The way she briefly glanced toward the jury, then decided not to engage them. And most importantly, the way she avoided looking at the prosecution's evidence screen. In my experience, avoidance is never random. It is a choice. Prosecutor Michael Reeves finally stood. Your Honor, the record will show that during the prior hearing, the defendant interrupted court proceedings, mocked judicial instructions, and refused compliance with direct orders. He paused deliberately, then added, and did so in front of witnesses. A murmur passed through the courtroom. Olivia let out a soft breath of amusement. That alone told me she still didn't fully grasp the seriousness of what was being established. I turned to her. Miss Carter, do you dispute these claims? She tilted her head slightly. I mean, depends on how dramatic you want to make it. A few people actually reacted out loud this time. That was the moment the energy shifted from discomfort to disbelief. Even experienced jurors looked unsettled, because defendants usually do one of three things: deny, justify, or remain silent. But she was doing something else entirely. She was reframing the courtroom itself as optional. Her attorney leaned toward her urgently. Olivia, stop talking. She ignored him. That's when I noticed something concerning in his eyes. Fear not of me. But of her next words, I leaned forward slightly. Miss Carter, I will remind you again, this court is not a stage. She looked at me directly this time, and for the first time, the smile faded. Not completely, just enough for me to see what was underneath it. Challenge. Then why does it feel like one? She asked. Silence, builds silence. Even the air felt heavier after that sentence. I've heard disrespect before, but this was structured defiance. Thought out, almost rehearsed. And in psychology terms, that's more dangerous than impulsive behavior, because it means she believed it. I glanced briefly toward Judge Judy, seated in observation. Her expression had not changed much, but her eyes were sharper now, focused, analytical. He wasn't reacting emotionally. She was categorizing Olivia, and that realization alone seemed to unsettle the defendant more than anything I had said. For the first time, Olivia adjusted her posture slightly, just a fraction. But in a courtroom, fractions matter. The prosecutor sensed it too. He immediately pressed forward. Your Honor, we request that the court formally caution the defendant regarding contempt behavior. I nodded slowly, but before I could respond, Olivia spoke again. I just think it's funny, she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She continued, eyes now fixed forward. People here act like words in this room actually control what happens outside it. That line didn't just land. It spread like a ripple through every seat. And for the first time since she walked in, A.B. realized this wasn't just arrogance, it was ideology, a belief system built on immunity. And belief systems are not corrected easily in court. They have to be broken by reality. I remember thinking, this is where it starts to turn or spiral completely out of control, because what she said next changed the entire direction of the trial. And even I, sitting on the bench for decades, felt the first real warning that this case was no longer predictable. I have learned something over years on the bench that no law book teaches you. The most dangerous moment in any courtroom is not when a defendant speaks too much. It is when they begin to believe they are untouchable in real time. Olivia Carter was approaching that moment. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. What started as tension had now become something sharper anticipation mixed with disbelief. Even the jury no longer looked at her with neutral curiosity. They were studying her like a puzzle they could not solve. Prosecutor Michael Reeves resumed. Your Honor, the record reflects a pattern of deliberate disregard for courtroom authority and repeated verbal interference during proceedings. He stepped forward slightly. We are prepared to introduce video evidence from the prior hearing. That changed the energy instantly, because evidence is where confidence either stands or collapses. A screen behind the courtroom flickered on. Olivia didn't move, but I noticed something important. Her breathing changed, barely visible. But there the video began playing. Her voice from the prior hearing echoed through the courtroom, mocking tone, interruptions, refusal to comply with instructions. Gasps spread quietly across the room. The jury leaned forward. But Olivia smiled again, not because she was amused, because she was waiting. That realization hit me in a way I did not expect. I turned slightly toward her. Do you wish to explain what the court is observing? She didn't look at the screen. She looked at me and said calmly, "It looks worse when you cut it like that." A few people shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor immediately responded, "The footage is unedited, Your Honor." Silence followed, a long one, and in that silence I studied her again. This was not panic, not denial, not even deflection in the traditional sense. It was reframing reality under pressure, a psychological defense mechanism often seen in individuals who have never faced consequences they respected. Her attorney leaned in again, whispering urgently, but she raised her hand slightly without even looking at him. And he stopped. That moment told me more than anything else in this trial so far. She was not just ignoring authority. She was controlling the behavior of the people around her through sheer confidence alone. And that is where influence becomes dangerous. I glanced briefly toward Judge Judy again. Her expression had changed now, subtle tightening around the eyes. Not anger. Recognition, like she had seen his personality type before and knew exactly where it usually leads. Then she spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough for me to hear from the bench. She's been like this before. The courtroom didn't hear it fully, but I did, and I felt a shift in my understanding of this case immediately because that sentence implied history, batos. A repetition beyond this courtroom. I turned back to Olivia. For the record, I said carefully, this court will not reinterpret evidence based on preference. She nodded slowly, almost politely, then leaned forward just slightly and said the words that changed everything. Then I guess we'll just see who this courtroom really listens to. That was not a statement of emotion. It was a challenge, a prediction. And for the first time since the trial began, Abby felt the unsettling possibility that she believed she was about to win. Not legally, but socially. And that is where cases become unpredictable because law can handle guilt. But it struggles when someone turns the entire courtroom into a game of perception. I remember looking at the jury at that moment and seeing something I did not like at all, uncertainty. And in the next phase of this trial, uncertainty was about to turn into something far more explosive. I still remember the exact moment the courtroom changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle, almost invisible. Like a thread quietly snapping under tension, the prosecutor, Michael Reeves, stood again, this time with a different energy. More controlled, more deliberate. Your Honor, he said, placing a new document on the desk, we've obtained testimony from the prior proceeding officer regarding the defendant's conduct. Olivia Carter didn't even glance at it. That alone would have concerned most people. But what concerned me more was how calm she remained as the net tightened around her. Because experienced defendants either resist or they start calculating, and she looked like she was calculating. The bailiff handed me the new statement. As I read it, I noticed something that made me pause longer than usual. A written account describing not just verbal disrespect, but a deliberate attempt to disrupt court protocol, challenge authority, and provoke reaction from judicial staff taught behavior. Intentional escalation. I looked up slowly. And for a brief moment, I felt the courtroom holding its breath with me. This was no longer about attitude. It was about control. I turned to Olivia. Ms. Carter, this statement alleges repeated intentional disruption of judicial authority. Do you deny this conduct? She finally leaned forward and smiled, but this time it was different, less playful, more precise. I don't deny anything, she said softly. That sentence hit the room like a dropped object in silence. The prosecutor immediately followed. So you admit to contempt? Olivia tilted her head slightly. I admit, she said, that people in here take themselves very seriously. A reaction broke out, small, shocked whispers, a few audible gasps. Even the jury shifted uncomfortably. But I noticed something more important. She wasn't losing control. She was redirecting attention. That's when Judge Judy spoke again from the observation area. Calm, clear. That's not confidence, she said. That's conditioning. The courtroom went silent. Olivia turned her head slowly toward her. For the first time in the entire trial, her expression tightened. Just slightly, but enough, because being observed is one thing, being understood is another. The prosecutor seized the moment. Your Honor, we move to hold the defendant in contempt based on repeated courtroom disruption and refusal to comply with judicial instruction. Now the weight of the room shifted toward me, every eye, every breath waiting. I remember looking at Olivia at that exact moment. She was no longer smiling, but she wasn't afraid either. That was the most troubling part. She looked prepared. like she believed consequences were still negotiable, and I had seen that belief before in cases that never ended quietly. I paused, let the silence stretch, and then I said the words that changed everything. The court is considering contempt proceedings. That should have ended it. But instead, Olivia leaned back slowly in her chair and said something I will never forget for the rest of my career. "Do it," she said. 2 words, no emotion, no hesitation. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. That she wasn't trying to avoid consequences anymore. She was waiting for them, almost inviting them, as if the outcome of this courtroom was something she had already predicted long before she ever walked in. And that's when I understood this trial was no longer about discipline, it was about exposure, because whatever was coming next was going to reveal exactly how far her belief in control truly went. And I knew that sitting on that bench, real turning point had not happened yet. I have issued contempt rulings before. I have seen defendants break under pressure, apologize, or finally realize the weight of the courtroom they are standing in. But what happened in that final moment was different entirely. The courtroom was silent after her words. Do it, not defiant in the emotional sense, defiant in a way that suggested she believed the system was reacting to her, not judging her. I remember looking at Olivia Carter for several seconds without speaking, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Not arrogance, not fear. Anticipation, like she was waiting to see how far this room would go before it proved her point. The prosecutor, Michael Reeves, was still standing. The contempt motion hung in the air like a sealed verdict waiting for signature. Every eye in the courtroom shifted toward me, even the jury, even the observers, and Judge Judy remained completely still. But her eyes were fixed on Olivia like she was watching a psychological pattern reach its final stage. I finally spoke. The court finds the defendant in direct contempt for repeated disruption and refusal to comply with judicial authority. A pause, I continued. Custody is ordered for a cooling-off period, immediate escort. The bailiff stepped forward, and that's when it happened. Olivia didn't resist. She didn't panic. She slowly stood up and looked around the courtroom one last time, not at me, not at the jury, at the people watching, and she smiled again. But this time, it wasn't confidence. It was something else, almost like satisfaction, as if the outcome confirmed something she already believed. 2 bailiffs moved beside her. As they escorted her down the aisle, the room remained frozen, no shouting, no chaos, just silence, and I remember thinking, sometimes the most disturbing reaction in a courtroom is not resistance. It is acceptance without remorse. As she reached the exit doors, she stopped for just a fraction of a second, turned slightly, and said quietly, almost too quiet for most to hear, "You all reacted exactly how I thought you would." Then she was gone. The doors closed, and the courtroom exhaled at once. Only then did I notice the tension in my own hands. Judge Judy stood up slowly from the observation area, and before leaving, she looked at me, not speaking at first. Then she said something that stayed with me long after the case ended. "That wasn't disrespect," she said quietly. "That was testing boundaries." And she walked out. I sat there for a moment longer than usual after the session ended, because in my years on the bench, I've learned something simple but difficult. Some defendants come to court to defend themselves. Others come to test the system itself. Olivia Carter did not lose that day. She observed, she learned, and she left knowing exactly how the room reacted when pushed. And that is what still disturbs me most, not what she did, but what she understood, because in the courtroom that day, justice was delivered. But so was something far less comfortable, a reminder that authority is only real when it is tested. And she tested it completely.